This morning we are finishing up our study of Daniel by reading Daniel chapter 6, verses 1 through 15. I noticed this morning at the early service that I have Daniel 6, 1 through 18 on my sermon. So those of you who are reading along at home, it's 1 through 15. All right, I'm reading from the NIV this morning. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God." So the administrators and the satraps went as a group to the king and said, "O King Darius, live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue a decree and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or man during the next 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, O king, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the laws of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed." So King Darius put the decree in writing. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. "Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or man except you, O king, would be thrown into the lion's den?" The king answered, "The decree stands in accordance with the laws of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be replaced." Then they said to the king, "Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day." When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Then the men went as a group to the king and said to him, "Remember, O king, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed." This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So we finish up our study of Daniel this morning with the most famous of stories, Daniel and the lion's den. We read the first part of the story this morning, in which the other administrators of the kingdom set up Daniel to get rid of him. You may have noticed that Nebuchadnezzar is no longer on the throne, but somehow, despite the change in king, Daniel remains in a position of power. He must have been doing his job well to maintain his reputation and then be offered one of the highest positions in the kingdom. At this point, we've moved from Babylonian rule to Persian rule. The administrators who are working against Daniel are likely Persians who do not like having a foreigner among their ranks, let alone in a position of power over them. However, we can tell from the story that King Darius really liked Daniel, as he tries to find a way out of punishing him and then rejoices when Daniel survives the ordeal. We didn't read the miracle of the story this morning because we're going to focus on Daniel's faithfulness. However, just a reminder, King Darius is forced to go through with the decree, and Daniel is thrown into the lion's den. The den is sealed with the king's mark, and Daniel is left overnight. But when the stone is removed, Daniel is still alive, and the king rejoices. Darius then turns his anger on those who had set Daniel up, throwing them and their entire families into the lion's den where they were killed. King Darius then declared the God of Israel to be the true God. Another miracle of resistance that reminds the reader who is really in charge. Hint, it's not the king. What's interesting about Daniel's act of resistance is that scholars aren't entirely sure whether praying with the windows open was a passive or intentional act. Different translations of the text from the same era use different words to describe his actions. Does he go back to his room and throw open his windows before praying? Or does Daniel go about his regular business, praying as the windows are open? In either scenario, Daniel knew the consequences of his actions. Praying to God would lead to his death. There's no statement of faith before King Darius, as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had done before Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel makes a statement of faith with his actions. He continues to pray as he always has. For the exiled Israelites, who were the audience of this story, Daniel's act of faith is a template for their own. In the face of those who would rather they abandon their God, they should keep on worshiping God. It's not in secret that Daniel prays, but it's also not on a street corner with lots of shouting. Daniel prays as he always had, facing his ancestral home of Jerusalem. It's a seemingly small act of faith, pouring out from his everyday life that shows who Daniel is truly faithful to. One of my most influential experiences in my life was the 2 years I spent on a high school speech team. I had somehow impressed an 8th grade teacher with a presentation on a president. I think it was Roosevelt, but I'm not positive at this point who it was anymore. She suggested that I would be good at speech. I joined up my freshman year and was immediately immersed into a whole new world. I remained on the team as long as I attended that school, and it truly shaped who I am today. I gained confidence in myself and realized potential that I never saw in a shy bookworm. However, as I look back now, this experience has also shaped me in other ways. As much as speech was about confidence in front of a room, it was also about winning. The competitions were set up in such a way that you could win by simply following a rubric. I was taught to move at certain times and use hand gestures in certain ways. I memorized entire essays written by others and had to learn how to speak them in character as the author. For a persuasive speech, I had to write it myself using scholarly resources. But instead of researching a topic and then writing a speech, my coach had me, actually I think she chose a topic for me that would score well, and then find sources to support the theory. I am extremely grateful that my parents never heard my persuasive speech about the increase of STDs in teenagers. I am not even sure what gave me the confidence to give that speech at the time. What I remember most vividly was that all of the resources I could find did not support the conclusion. My coach told me that it didn't really matter. Speech wasn't about content, it was about how I gave the speech, how it would score. It was about winning. So under the direction of my coach, I manipulated the resources and I lied. I was told it was what everyone else was doing. As a young teenager, feeling like I had finally found a place I belonged, I didn't see these actions in the same light as I see them now. Back then, I was thrilled to be good at something and to be recognized for it. I would have done whatever my coach suggested because I trusted her. What I learned those 2 years, along with the acting I did in the plays and musicals at that school, was how to lie. To be honest, I learned that I am exceptionally good at lying. What I didn't learn those 2 years was that what I was being taught was dangerous, and it still is. It's so easy in life to slide into a new environment, mold yourself to fit into it, and then go on living like it's the right thing. I see now that I could have approached Speech Team with a different strategy and still have been successful. All I could see then was my desire to fit in. I did not take the stand that Daniel did. By the time I joined Speech Team, I was 14 and had grown up in the church. My family faithfully attended any service, study, or fellowship activity there was. I still chose to lie. Daniel made the better choice. Now, my choice to lie did not send me to a lion's den, for which I am very grateful. However, it has influenced who I am today. My dishonesty in my teenage years led to extreme honesty in my adult years. I can't lie with my words. Rob can give you examples if you ask. No matter how small, outright lying makes me incredibly uncomfortable. Yet, at the same time, I still find it difficult to share personal experiences with others. It's much easier for me to hide how I feel and to act like everything is fine. This level of lying goes beyond words and into my ability to share in vulnerability with my fellow Christians. I struggle daily to remain open instead of pretending. Daniel continued to be faithful, no matter what the consequences would be. We are also faced with opportunities to show our faithfulness to God. Because we aren't faced with immediate death, our choices seem small and unimportant. However, every choice we make should reflect our faithfulness to God. I failed to remain faithful, and I still deal with the consequences. I'm sure we can all think of a moment in which we failed to be faithful. Just because we didn't face lions as a result doesn't mean that it wasn't a big deal. Here's what I know about our faithful God. Here's what we should know about our faithful God. God forgives our moments of weakness when we turn to God, confess our sin, and do things differently. God has forgiven me for learning how to lie, but it's only when I continue to actively choose not to lie that I remain in good relationship with God. Every time that I choose to be myself instead of acting my way through a situation brings me one step closer to God. The same is true for you. You can find forgiveness for your moments of unfaithfulness, but only if you choose faithfulness the next time the choice is given to you. Daniel remains for us an example of how to make faithful choices. We too can have a lifetime of faithfulness, just as Daniel did. No matter what mistakes we've made in the past, God gives us every chance to learn how to make faithful choices. In an essay based on Paul's command in Romans to not be conformed to this world, Dr. Martin Luther King wrote, "Everywhere and at all times, the love ethic of Jesus is radiant light, revealing the ugliness of our stale conformity." Making faithful choices means making choices that reflect the life of love lived out by Jesus Christ. So let us all strive to be less stale and more radiant now and always. And we can begin this morning with our faithful act for those of us who are in person of joining in the table of communion.